All right, let's give it up one more time for all three of our speakers this morning.
Thank you for that. It was heartfelt.
Thank you all. You guys did an amazing job. Well, we had a lot of great questions that came in. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to kind of go in the order that you each spoke. Helen, we'll start with you. How would you compare modern day feminism you grew up with and identify with to what it is now?
I guess I'd make just a couple points. One, because it turned out that women did not actually hate men and want to avoid marriage and kids, and the last 40, 50 years have proved that, a modern feminist sensibility insists that we take account of women's desire to, it's about 87%, 87%, somewhere between that, are probably going to get married and have kids, and that we have to account for that. So a political agenda, a practical agenda has to make room for those relationships. The second thing, I think, is that modern feminism is even more obsessed with sex as the ultimate act of freedom than early feminism. Like, early feminism talked a lot about job equality and education, et cetera. And now, you would actually think, and I don't think, this isn't being political, it's just a fact, the Obama administration acts as if the most important freedom you have is to do this or that sexual act. And that's definitely the agenda of like Planned Parenthood feminism, NOW, NARAL. It's all sex, contraception, abortion. Even more than it was in the 70s and 80s, where they had some other sensibilities that were at least common good oriented to some extent.
Great, thank you. Pat, you started talking about, how we can get wrapped up in our own pride and even vanity and leadership. When we start feeling like that, how can we combat those feelings?
Well, the putting on the armor every morning in Scripture and prayer, and when we don't do that, you all know this, you skip a day because you're busy, and things happen. And I know that every morning that I don't do that, I feel it. And it's a daily, hourly reminder, which is why these things we do when we can go to Mass and go to adoration and pray, read the Bible and do prayer, daily study, it's always to keep us from falling. And so without that, we all fall prey to the temptations of pride and all those other ancillary parts of that root cause of sin. So I think it's just the discipline of going back to God every time. I wish I had a more sexy answer than that, but the truth is, it really is just that.
Prayer is pretty sexy.
Prayer is sexy. Okay, yes.
He's fired.
I hope that doesn't get tweeted.
I really enjoyed working with you, Steve.
Hashtag regrets. Okay.
Too late.
I just got fired on stage. Joe.
What's it like to fire someone on stage?
What's it like to fire? Joe, any advice for someone trying to discern a relationship with a Protestant?
Ooh, yeah, I guess that was sort of part of my life story, wasn't it? I'd say a couple of things. Actually, yeah, Pat, sounds like same boat. I think there are probably a number of us, a surprising number of people who that's pretty common now. And I'd say two things. That's partially from my own experience, but also Becky and I, one of the things we've done as a couple is engaged and married couple preparation. And so we see it a lot with the couples we meet with. And I think there's kind of two things that have to happen for couples where there's a mix of Catholic and Protestant. The first one is the couple needs to honestly talk about it. And I'd say with many of the couples that Becky and I have met with, they don't do it. It's like it's the elephant in the room, but they won't discuss it under the idea that somehow it's going to go away. Well, it doesn't go away. And so it's one of those really important opportunities where a couple needs to be very honest about their beliefs. And to recognize that beliefs can change. Actually, Becky and I, when we first started dating, she told me, I will never convert. So much for that. She's more Catholic than I am now. But there's a recognition that opinions can change, but they must be expressed. So the couple needs to be talking very honestly about that. And that's part of the discernment process for where that relationship's going to go. The second thing, though, and this is actually where Becky and I failed for a long time, was that others need to be involved in that discussion. People that the couple trusts, so clergy. And clergy of both traditions, so not just your Catholic priest or deacon, but also your potential spouse's minister. And couples who have gone through the same thing. Proverbs says that plans fail when there is no counsel. And that's definitely been the case. I've seen where couples try to struggle just on their own and don't get help. They're setting themselves up for trouble. So I'd say those are the two most important things that someone should do.
Pat?
Yeah, one of the things, I was talking to Matt Maher about this last night. One of the things, I name dropped that, didn't I? Is that...
Pope Benedict told me never to name drop.
Yeah. He told me he told you that, yeah. One thing I realized is this. No matter how ardent I was in my faith, my wife could not convert for me. And that's the hard thing. And that's one of the things we have to realize. It wasn't until she met other women she could relate to that were Catholic and met priests that she loved that she could say, if my boys became priests like them, that would be great. Then she wanted to convert. So actually the ardor of my faith was, which is fine, was a stumbling block because she thought, well, if I'm doing it just for you, then that's not good. So that's one thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, I would agree with that. When Becky was going through our CIA, we made a deal that I would never come with her, that someone else would be her sponsor through that process. And again, and I said the same thing, and I agree with you, Pat. When Becky did convert, it was because she could stand up and say that she confessed and believed everything that the church taught, and that was very important to both of us.
So making it important to allow them to have their own journey and not necessarily attach to the person, but more attached to Jesus and the faith.
And that's
timeline.
Yeah, no timeline. And is that any different from the work we do on campus? If one of the students we're working with becomes attached to us as a student or us as a missionary, that's disordered. The focus needs to be on Christ and that person's true belief. So what's true in what we do on campus is no different than what we do in our married life.
Absolutely.
Great. Pat, I was going to ask you, I mean, the vast majority of student leaders out here and missionaries are going to find themselves out in a career, business, law, politics, whatever it might be. You've worked with some of the top corporate leaders in the world and counseled and advised them. If you could say something to these young leaders as they go out, what would you say is how do they live their Catholic faith as God leads them on a path to wherever he's drawing them?
Well, I think that with every passing year as I get older, I realize all the wisdom in life comes from this faith. And it is amazing to me how often I think I'm coming up with a new idea and I realize it comes from the Bible or Jesus said it and so people say, I've been talking to a few schools, like, what should we do to teach people how to be better Catholic business? Teach them about their faith, because that's where wisdom comes from. So the best business school is found in the Bible because it's about wisdom. And so that's what I would say is that is the true source of knowledge and wisdom.
Fantastic. Helen, clap for that, that's great. Helen, we've been blessed to be friends for more years than I'd like to count. You've been a great leader. I'd like to ask maybe for some help from you, for both the men and the women. How do we as men help women to rise in leadership? And how do women, you gave the great Marian model for all of us, but how do women take the example that you've given and your leadership and become who they're meant to be in this culture?
Thank you. It's a tough but great question. I just will open by saying I was at a conference at University of Virginia a few years ago, and one of the leading psychologists of fatherhood was there. The guy's #1 name in his field. And he said, it's really interesting. We have done absolutely nothing in the field about complementarity between men and women in all these years. I think it's the key to the future. Right now, to allow men to be men and women to be women, to look at the literature, there's a ton out there. It's fascinating. You even look at US government statistics, NIH stuff, Health and Human Services. The amount of medical and other scientific research regarding differences between men and women, you see it in the psychological research. I think it's another UVA guy, Stephen Rhodes, taking sex difference seriously. We need to explore this. The world isn't going to. I actually think it's going to be a place where Catholics do. And again, because wisdom so often is coming from the Bible, the idea that image of God is male and female, right now we're at a place where women are still operating, I think, too often according to typical models of success, which are typically male, that's been the past, and rather we need to learn what it is that we do well together. And obviously we know what that looks like in marriage and parenting, but we don't know what it looks like out in the world. We don't. And I think Catholics are poised to lead the way in that conversation, and not putting our qualities down. I mean, I've been married for 28 years now, and my husband and I laugh about things that we thought would not be differences between us, and those differences become. I'm not talking about tough division. I'm talking about just different personalities. You see them so clearly in retrospect, but you see how they work together for the good of each other and the kids and the extended family at that point. The world is not yet open to that. So I think that that's going to be a place where Catholics could lead.
Great, thank you.
You know, can I jump in? A question came in on Twitter, and what you just said, that's a reality that we're faced with. Now, we do have a group of alumni and postgraduates here with us, and the majority of the rest of us are going into the workplace, probably somewhere, somehow. How do we evangelize in the workplace, and what does that look like with our managers and coworkers and even people that we manage? How do we do that?
Well, I'll give something
this can
brief.
Be for anyone,
yeah, since I just finished, I'd say I work at a state university now. I just adore my colleagues. They are every kind of religious and background and none. And a couple of things I have found that they've commented on. One is acts of personal kindness that seem to flow from the faith. The other is living in accordance with my beliefs. So for instance, the fact that, people will sometimes dismiss Pope Francis's gestures in this regard, but I think they're really important. The fact that I drive a crap old Chevy truck, that I don't spend money on things, that pretty much everything I own is secondhand, that I have kids and I put them first, and my husband, that I'm honest at work, I do my job. Like, they know what I do for the church. I mean, you can find that in print. But to see that there's integrity in personal life and in work life, I think that speaks more to them than all the statements I could make.
Living a witness.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, Paul VI said that modern man listens to witnesses before he listens to teachers. And I found that to be particularly, as I finally figured it out at Procter & Gamble, that's how I did it. It's everything Helen just cited. And also being attentive to the response of the people around us, and then being ready to offer more to those who are interested. A guy I was working with, Cradle Baptist, just began to ask questions about Catholicism, and I simply started, well, why don't you come to daily Mass with me? Why don't you come to the seminary one night? Why don't you come to adoration with me? And gave me a phone call after I moved to Denver. He gave me a phone call and said, the whole family's starting RCIA. And it was, just the one step at a time.
So this whole concept of, that St. Francis once said, but he didn't, I guess, about, and occasionally use words, and he didn't say that. What I found is that I had my own company. We've had it for 16 years now, and I've gone to Mass and done that stuff, and there came to a point where I had to use words. And I didn't want to, because I live in California. You can get thrown in jail for talking about your faith. And I finally, I will tell this story. A year and a half ago or so, I talked to Matt Maher for the first time on the phone. And he and I had a similar
Name drop.
Yeah, second time. Same guy.
And then Pope Benedict came in. We had a three-way call. It was great. And I got off the phone with Matt, first call ever, and we had similar situations, and I called everyone into my office.
You're a rock star?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I do that too. And I got off the phone, I called my entire staff, we had a small company, into my office, and I said, I think I might have to leave the company. And they said, why? And I said, because I think I have to go live my faith more overtly, and I don't feel like I can do it here. And I was the founder of the company. And some of them were crying, some of them were pissed off at me, and some were just, why are you saying this? And they finally just said, why don't you share your faith then? Why don't we start growing in our faith together? And as a result, now they're doing Bible study together. We're growing our faith. And But until that time, I was protecting from having an awkward conversation, even out of love. And I finally said, until that happened, they didn't grow in their faith. So sometimes there's that moment where we got to go, I'd like to share this with you.
Yeah.
Very cool. Hey, I'd like to start with Joe, but I really would like to hear from all three of you. We are filled in the room of young leaders who are going to be following Jesus Christ wherever he asks them to go. But as they discern that, it's scary and it's challenging. As they're called to be radically open to any possibility that he might ask them to, what are the pitfalls and what are the advice and counsel you'd give them to be able to discern God's will and follow it boldly?
I would say there are two pitfalls that I've seen. One is the one that I'm very guilty of, and I talked about it in my talk, which is a lack of trust in God's providence. And I think that's coupled with a sense of kind of almost taking our careers too seriously, which sounds like a weird thing to say. But I had a sense as I was discerning leaving the corporate world that people would think less of me. Oh, wow, you had that great corporate job, and now what is he doing? And that my family would be like destitute. And the truth is, God's going to take care of us, and we actually have a lot more runway on things like this than we realize, especially if we do a little bit of prudence and planning. So I'd say the first is that lack of trust. I think the second, though, and it's a little more subtle, is that the careerism sneaks in not by saying, hey, guess what? I'm going to make you really focused on your career and reject God. Because you'd recognize that and you'd say, no, I don't want to do that. But it's more subtle. It just kind of over time can crowd out our sense of faith. So you're at work 8, 9, 10 or more hours a day. The culture of that workplace is going to seep in. And over time, you might find, I know I found my values aligning more toward that than to my faith. So it was never intentional. It was just very subtle. So I think that's a less obvious, but a huge pitfall that sometimes you don't realize until you've already fallen into it.
I would say something that segues from what Joe did. I had that really weird smells and bells thing when I left law to do work in pro-life, where I don't usually get any indication from God of something really specific. But I was at Mass, and I was given to understand I was going to take a job in pro-life that I had fought against taking for 6 months. So a couple things that were really useful in that experience. One is don't live up to your income. Whatever it is you're earning, don't exploit every cent of it so that when it comes time to leave it, you can leave it. And if I had not done that, I couldn't have left big law for the church or left law in the church for policy. So don't live up to your income. Money is a constraint, it's not the goal. And second, make sure your spouse is along for the ride. So happily, my husband had been sitting in front of the television with me going, wow, these people who are doing this pro-life talking, I don't think they're hitting the mark here. They need somebody. Maybe you could do that, And he was with me so that when, he and I took on our 11 student loans for college and 3 grad schools, we were prepared. So that's very practical advice.
Well, we're all really glad he said that to you.
Yeah, right.
So.
I got nothing to add to what you said. All I know, though, is I have a tool I want to share with you. I don't know if I'm supposed to do this, but every day I read in this book called The Better Part, Father John Bartunek. Sure. And it's a gospel reading and a reflection on it. I read it every day, and it is the thing that keeps me. That's a little tool that for me. Everybody has their own thing, but that's been a saving grace for me.
I just think I'll answer my own question.
Do that.
Nobody asked, so I thought I might as well. But there's a heaven and there's a hell. If we live like it, we're going to live radical lives for Christ, because really that's all that matters. If you get all the fame and all the wealth and all the fortune and all the accolades and you die without God, you're a total failure. And if you don't hit any of the bullseyes on any of those issues, but you die knowing Christ and having loved others for his sake, you win. That's what it's all about. And to be able to choose boldly for him will be rewarded greatly.
You know, Curtis.
Now you have something to say.
Well, yeah, you reminded me about why I mentioned the book. It's because it comes down to habits. Because I remember when I first started working, a guy stopped me and said, spend time with your children growing up. And I realized when I'd go away, I'd get used to being away. And when you spend time away from the church and from your faith and from daily habits, you get used to it. And so without those daily habits, and you're going to go out into the secular world, and nobody's going to be saying, have you done your prayers today? They're going to be saying, don't do that. Like they said to you, like, why are you going to, you already go to Mass for an hour a week. What are you doing that other thing for?
Well, Helen and
Put the binocle away, Steve.
Helen, you mentioned women speak for themselves when you spoke. How can we learn more about that?
WomenSpeakForThemselves.org. I think we have about 45,000 women signed up now, very grassroots, woman to woman, with 2 points. We wanted to let the federal government know, and what's really a watershed moment for religious freedom. I mean, you realize that if they can tell us which of our institutions is religious and which is not sufficiently religious to get a conscience exemption, then it's contraception today, it's abortion tomorrow, and believe me, with an aging population, it's euthanasia the day after that. Because a lot of people are going to think euthanasia is a very logical choice in a world with, you know, it's a difficult world for many people. So if they win this one, it's a very slippery slope. I think we've tried to make the message both, number one, that the government is wrong when they think that women don't support religious freedom at the, quote, expense of free birth control. And number two, that their view of what women's freedom is, which is basically remaining childless, relationship-free, so that they can accomplish in the workplace. I mean, you got a lot of witnesses here to what the workplace means and doesn't mean. I love reading and writing. I absolutely love it. I would do it if I wasn't paid. Thank God sometimes I am, although probably 60% of the work that I do with the church, not so much. But it only means what it means if with you as the human being who's doing that work. And if it's not with God and for God, you're not going to find it very rewarding in the long run. You get away with it for a couple of years. Some people fool themselves for longer. But the absence of religious freedom is going to be huge. And the idea that women are going to be satisfied with this limited definition of what freedom means is a very dangerous concept. So women as women right now, because so much of religious freedom attack is being made in women's name. And by the way, the other attack on religious freedom is in the name of marriage, right? Same-sex marriage. These issues of sex, marriage, and family are driving the shrinking of religious freedom. You can't just argue for religious freedom. I think we only win the argument if we also have a saleable argument on what we're saying about sex, about relationships, about marriage. I think you have to pair them.
You know, something just occurred to me is that the problem with what's happening in religious freedom is not that we're going to be persecuted. The problem is that people are going to choose not to be persecuted and lose their faith.
Right.
I mean, those of us that get to be persecuted and endure that, that's a blessing.
And the country needs to see it too. It's when the little sisters of the poor are put in handcuffs and taken off, there's going to be a lot of witness in that. Right. You know, I mean, I don't mean to sound too flip on that, but that's what witness is. Yeah. And on this question of the HHS mandate, we really do have to be willing to defy the government while we're also selling the argument on the content of our teachings.
Absolutely.
Thank you for doing that.
Any other final closing thoughts or ideas from anyone?
I think the message that you hear across the board as you think about going out and being leaders in the church, leaders in society, and true disciples of Christ, is, you know, Blessed John Paul II, the theme of his papacy, one of the themes was, do not be afraid. Be not afraid. Open wide the doors to Christ. It's easier to do in some generations than others. This may be tough for us in this generation and in yours. But let's embrace that call from soon-to-be St. John Paul II.
I think I've talked plenty.
I would just say that I think building on what you said, Pat, in your talk, that you know, God told us that if we're faithful in little things, that He will give us greater things. And for you to be true to the servant leadership that you've been called to right now, by just loving those who are in your life. The Catholic Church has not failed in our lifetime to place men and women in leadership. We have the Speaker of the House, we have the Vice President, we have this majority of Supreme Court justices, a disproportionate number of congressmen and senators, but many of them have failed to be consistent with their Catholic faith while they've risen into leadership. In this room, There are people who are already changing the world because you're loving those in your life. As God allows it and blesses you in those little things, quote unquote, he will raise you up so that we'll change the world with his grace. Please be true to that, and remember, just loving others for Christ's sake is what it's all about.
Amen. Thank you all. Thank you all so much for being here with us, for sharing in this moment with us. And guys, let's thank them all for being here today.